My name is Carmela Adamas. I'm 32 years old, and I can tell you right now, money doesn't magically shield you from family drama. If anything, it sharpens it. It makes people reveal what they've been hiding behind polite smiles for years. I started working when I was 18. Not the summer job kind of working. The kind where you learn how to swallow rejection, how to stretch dollars, how to keep moving even when nobody claps for you. I built my first business while other people were still arguing over majors and dorm rooms. And when I walked away from college after 1 year, I didn't just disappoint my parents. I embarrassed them. "You're throwing your life away," my mother said, stirring her coffee like she was rehearsing a dramatic scene. No degree, no future. My father didn't even look up. He grunted, which was his way of saying, "You're done talking now." That was how he dismissed me my whole life, like I was static in the background of the real story. They had no idea I'd already launched my first online venture, a niche e-commerce store that started in my tiny apartment with a folding table, a cheap printer, and late nights that blurred into early mornings. At first, it wasn't glamorous. It was a grind. But it grew, quietly, relentlessly. One store became two. Two became a network of companies. And by the time I was 27, I'd bought my house in cash. They never knew. Because I never told them. Not because I was ashamed, because I understood something early. In my family, facts didn't matter. Only appearances did. Status, titles, what people could brag about at church, at neighborhood parties, at those painfully curated dinners where everyone pretended to like each other. We were never close. My parents measured love like a report card. If you brought them something impressive, you were worthy of warmth. If you didn't, you became a lesson. And my older sister, Lila, was their masterpiece. Lila was the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in a high-rise office lobby. Polished hair, sharp suits, and a confidence so cold it could silence a room. Corporate lawyer, perfect resume. Luxury bags rotated like seasons. She never raised her voice, never got messy. She didn't have to. Her power came from knowing our parents would always choose her. They paraded her like proof of their parenting, and they used me like a warning label. Every family dinner followed the same script. I'd show up out of obligation, walk into that house that smelled like expensive candles and judgment, and immediately feel myself shrink, like the walls were trained to push me back into my place. My father would lean back in his chair, smirking like he already knew the punchline. "So," he'd say, dragging the word out, "still doing that little internet thing?" Lila would smile politely, like she was humoring a child. "Carmela, it's never too late to get a real job. Something stable." And my mother was the worst because she never sounded cruel. She sounded concerned. She'd tilt her head and say things like, "We just worry about you," as if the worry wasn't wrapped around a blade. For years, I let it slide. I didn't defend myself. I didn't show receipts. I didn't flash bank statements or brag about deals. I didn't mention the penthouse office I rented downtown, or the fact that I could buy their house 3 times over without touching my investments. I smiled through the comments. I endured the little laughs. And then I went home to the life they assumed I didn't have. I thought I could keep doing that forever, just existing around them, untouched, emotionally distant, keeping the peace by staying quiet. But then came the rainy Thursday. My mom texted, "Can you come by? We need help with something." That message looked harmless, almost normal. But the moment I stepped inside their house, I knew something was wrong. The air was too still, too staged. My father was in the living room, pacing like he was working himself up. Lila was on the couch with a glass of wine, her legs crossed, watching me like she'd already seen the ending. My mother stood by the fireplace with her arms folded, expression tight, like she'd been holding in words all day and couldn't wait to release them. "Carmela," my father started, stopping in front of me. His voice had that familiar tone, half lecture, half verdict. "We've been talking." My stomach tightened. "About what?" "You're 32 years old," he said, loud enough that it felt like an accusation. And it's clear this online nonsense isn't going anywhere. You've had enough time to figure your life out, but you're still wasting your potential. I blinked slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. What exactly are you getting at? He turned and pointed toward the front door like he was directing a scene. You've been living in that apartment for years, he said, and you're still showing up here asking for help with small things. We can't keep enabling you. I stared at him. Enabling me? I've never asked you for money, not once. Lila let out a short laugh, sharp, satisfied. Oh, come on. You've been coasting. You really think anyone believes you're making a living off your little business? My mother stepped forward, voice clipped. We've decided it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet for real. No more coming here. No more expecting us to bail you out. I felt something hot rise in my chest. Not rage exactly. Something worse. A mix of disbelief and clarity. I don't need you to bail me out, I said. I'm doing just fine. My father's face hardened. If you're doing so fine, then prove it. Survive without our help at all. I could hear the rain beating the windows. The room fell quiet in that heavy, staged way, like they wanted the moment to land. And then he said it. In fact, you can leave now, my father snapped. Go live in the streets if you have to. Maybe that'll wake you up. I looked at my mother. She didn't flinch, not even a little. I looked at Lila. She was sipping her wine like she was watching a show she'd been waiting all week to see. They thought they were giving me a reality check. They thought I'd panic, beg, cry, promise to get a real job. They had no idea I could buy their entire life with the money sitting in accounts they didn't know existed. The heat in my chest settled into something colder, steadier. I reached for my jacket draped over the chair. All right, I said softly. My mother's lips parted, probably ready to add one more jab, one more, we're doing this because we love you. But I didn't give her the chance. I slipped on my jacket and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound was so final it almost startled me. Outside, the rain hit my face like a slap. I got into my car, a black sedan they assumed was used and barely paid off. The truth was, it was one of 2 cars I owned, but I'd chosen it for a reason, because I didn't need them to know the truth yet. As I sat there, hands on the wheel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked calm, too calm, for someone who'd just been told to go live on the streets. And that's the part that still makes me laugh, quietly, when I think about it. Because I wasn't hurt. I wasn't broken. I was almost amused. They had finally done it. They'd crossed the line so completely that there was no crawling back, no pretending this was just family tension. They'd made their choice. They'd chosen their pride over their own daughter. And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place with perfect clarity. I drove off into the night, rain blurring the streetlights into streaks of white and gold, already knowing one thing for certain. 3 weeks from now, their entire view of me and of themselves was going to shatter in a way they would never forget. The first week after my parents threw me out was quiet. Not emotionally quiet. My mind was loud, relentless, replaying every word, every look, but quiet in the way that matters. No calls, no texts, no, are you okay, or let's talk. Nothing. It was like I'd been erased from the family roster overnight. I didn't expect an apology. I wasn't naive enough for that. But some small, stupid part of me had assumed there'd be something, a check-in, a half-hearted message wrapped in fake concern. There was nothing. So I went back to work. I say work, but that word doesn't really cover it. My home office wasn't a cramped desk shoved into a corner. It was a modern penthouse overlooking the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, steel and glass and quiet power. From my desk, I could see the skyline stretch out like a promise I'd already kept to myself. Every morning I made coffee, opened my laptop, and ran companies my parents believed didn't exist. By the second week, the silence broke, but not the way you'd expect. I started hearing things. Not directly, never directly. It came through mutual acquaintances, offhand comments, half-embarrassed pauses when people realized they were saying too much. My mother, it turned out, had been busy. She told her church friends I was living out of my car now. According to her, my online thing had collapsed, and I was too proud to admit it. She said it with a sigh, like a martyr, like a woman burdened by a wayward daughter she'd tried so hard to save. Lila wasn't far behind. She told one of my old high school friends that I was finally learning life's lessons the hard way. Apparently, she even joked about maybe letting me do odd jobs for her firm once I got desperate enough. Fetching coffee, filing papers, something age-appropriate for someone like me. They weren't just dismissing me, they were rewriting me. One night, I got a text from my cousin Mateo, one of the few people in the family who had always treated me like an adult instead of a disappointment. Mateo: "Hey, random question. You okay?" Me: "Define okay." There was a pause. Then the typing bubble appeared again. Mateo: "I overheard something at dinner. Your mom was telling people you're basically homeless. Said you'll probably come crawling back soon." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Mateo: "Also, Lila joked that maybe she could give you some temp work when you hit bottom." She laughed about it. That laugh, that imaginary laugh, landed harder than my parents' words ever had. It wasn't anger that flooded me. It was something colder, because hearing it secondhand stripped away any remaining illusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't tough love. This was entertainment. I was their cautionary tale, their shared joke, the story they used to feel superior, righteous, successful. I didn't reply to Mateo right away. Instead, I set my phone down and looked out over the city lights, watching cars move like veins of light through the streets below. I felt like I was standing outside my own life, watching people burn bridges just to make sure I couldn't cross them back. By the third week, I made a decision. Not to confront them, to observe. Mateo mentioned that Sunday dinners had become a ritual since I left, a weekly performance of unity. I didn't tell him what I was planning, but that Sunday evening, I drove by my parents' house. Not in my usual car, I took the silver coupe, the one they didn't know I owned. Sleek, quiet, expensive in a way that didn't beg for attention. I parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way. From the sidewalk, I could see them through the dining room window. My parents at the head of the table. Lila beside them, animated, confident, wine glasses raised, plates full. They looked happy. I could practically hear the conversation. Lila talking about her latest case. My parents nodding, proud. And somewhere between the entree and dessert, my name would come up. Not with sadness, but with that familiar shake of the head. Poor Carmela, such wasted potential. I didn't feel angry. What I felt was sharper, because I finally understood something. They needed me to fail. My failure was the glue that held their version of reality together. Without it, they'd have to look too closely at themselves. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her tone was light, almost cheerful, like nothing had happened. "Carmela, darling," she said, "your father and I need your help moving some old furniture next weekend. Since you've got nothing else going on, you should have time." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "I'm busy," I said. She sighed dramatically. "Busy with what? Work?" There was a small, knowing chuckle on her end. "Of course. Your business. Just try to make time for family, okay? You might need us someday." That was the moment it clicked. They didn't just think they were better than me. They thought they were my safety net. They genuinely believed I'd come crawling back when life crushed me, because that's how the story always went in their heads. And for a brief second, I considered telling her everything, telling her how wrong she was, telling her exactly how unnecessary she'd made herself in my life. But then I stopped, because if I revealed the truth now, it would be wasted. No, I decided to let them keep stacking the lies, let them dig the hole deeper, let them grow comfortable in the fantasy where they were the heroes and I was the lesson. By the time the 4th week rolled around, I felt strangely calm, detached. I knew where I stood with them, and I wasn't losing sleep over it. I'd accepted something I'd been avoiding for years. Whatever version of family I thought I had didn't actually exist. And just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, They proved me wrong. It started with an email from my bank. Subject: unusual account activity. Immediate attention required. At first, I assumed it was a scam, but when I logged in, my stomach dropped. 2 withdrawals, both over $7,000. The account was old, one my parents had opened for me when I was a teenager, a joint savings account I'd forgotten to close years ago. It barely crossed my mind anymore. Both withdrawals were marked as in-person transactions. At a branch 2 blocks from my parents' house, I called the bank immediately. The teller remembered it clearly. She said you authorized it, the teller explained. There was a family emergency. I felt my hands start to shake, not from the amount, but from the audacity. I didn't call my mother. Instead, I called Mateo. After I explained, there was a long silence. Carmela, he said slowly, I think I know where that money went. Where? Lila just put a down payment on a new luxury SUV. She said it was a gift from the family, for all her hard work. Something inside me went completely still. That night, I drove past my parents' house again. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street and watched through the living room window. Lila was holding up a set of car keys, laughing. They were celebrating. With my money. Whatever thread of loyalty I'd been holding on to snapped clean in that moment. Later that week, I got a text from my mother. Hope you're not upset about the savings account. It was just sitting there, and your sister needed help. You'll make more money someday. Family comes first. No apology. No shame. Just entitlement. I didn't reply, because something inside me had shifted, not into anger, but into resolve. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. This was about making sure they never had the chance to hurt me again. And they were about to learn exactly what that meant. After the SUV incident, the air around me felt heavier, not in the way it feels when you're collapsing, more like the stillness before a storm, when everything goes quiet because the world is holding its breath. I wasn't angry anymore. That kind of heat burns out fast. What replaced it was colder, steadier, the kind of weight that settles into your bones and reminds you not to forget. I didn't tell anyone else what my mother had done, not friends, not colleagues, not even my business partners. I didn't want sympathy, and if I'm being honest, I didn't want questions. Part of me was embarrassed, not because they stole from me, but because I'd left a door unlocked long enough for them to walk through it without hesitation. I prided myself on control, on foresight, on strategy, and yet there it was, a joint account I should have closed years ago, still carrying my name like an invitation. For a couple of weeks, I pulled back. I skipped a few social events, passed on meetings I normally wouldn't miss, even ignored a quarterly networking dinner that had become routine for me over the years. I told people I was tied up with projects, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was, I was holed up in my penthouse, letting the silence wrap around me. I wasn't depressed. I still woke up early, still hit the gym, still kept my companies running smoothly. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, something felt raw, like I'd peeled back a layer I didn't know was still there. Every time I thought about my parents or Lila, it felt like watching the same movie on repeat. Me as the punchline, them as the audience laughing together. One night, I sat at my kitchen island with a glass of whiskey and scrolled through old photos on my phone. There was one from 5 years ago, my parents and Lila standing in front of a rented beach house, all smiles, sunburned and glowing. I was half in the frame, standing off to the side. That was the year they forgot to mention the trip was already fully booked when they invited me. I slept on a couch while Lila took the master suite. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. Looking at that photo now, something finally clicked. This wasn't new. The theft, the lies, the public humiliation. It was just the latest chapter in a story that had been playing out my entire life. I was always the one expected to compromise, to give more, to absorb whatever they handed me quietly so the family could keep functioning the way it always had. And maybe that was why they'd felt so comfortable taking my money. They thought I'd sulk, maybe go quiet for a bit. then show up for the next Sunday dinner like nothing happened. That's when my thinking shifted, not toward confrontation, toward leverage. I wasn't going to storm into their house and demand my money back. That would have been emotional, predictable, temporary. No, I wanted something permanent. The first step was subtle. I had my lawyer quietly review every account, every property, every asset in my name. We closed loopholes, severed old ties, locked things down so completely that there wouldn't be a single weak point left for them to exploit. At the same time, I reached out to a private contact, a man who specialized in gathering financial and legal records that weren't exactly public. I told him I wanted a full picture of my family's finances, not because I needed it right away, because I had a feeling I would. While all of that moved behind the scenes, I stayed distant. No calls, no texts, no appearances at family events. I wanted them to get used to my absence, to believe they'd successfully pushed me out for good. The more comfortable they felt, the more blindsided they'd be later. But that distance came at a cost. Some nights I'd stand by the windows, city lights stretching out below me, and feel how small my circle had become. Friends noticed, even if they didn't ask. Mateo checked in a few times, but I kept our conversations short. It was easier to stay in my own head than to explain what I was building toward. When you're planning something this precise, you can't afford loose ends. You can't afford to be sloppy. And quietly, in the back of my mind, a date began to form. I didn't circle it on a calendar, didn't write it down anywhere. But I knew when the moment would come, and I knew exactly where they'd be when it happened. The shift wasn't dramatic at first. It was more like turning a dimmer switch. One week, I was keeping my head down. The next, I was back in motion with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I dove into my businesses like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. My flagship company had been successful for years, but there were 2 expansion projects I'd been postponing. One in Europe, one in Southeast Asia. Within the same week, I greenlit both. That meant new teams, new partnerships, multi-million-dollar contracts that would cement our brand globally. The numbers were staggering, but that wasn't the point. I wanted my reach to be undeniable. At the same time, I started networking again, but selectively. No generic mixers, no shallow introductions. I attended high-level investor dinners, international tech summits, charity galas where the guest list read like a power index. I made sure to be seen in rooms my family could only dream of entering. And I did it quietly. No social media posts, no press releases. I wanted this to be something they heard about from someone else's mouth, not mine. By mid-year, one of my smaller companies, a software startup I'd invested in early, was acquired for 8 figures. My cut alone was enough to buy half the properties in my parents' neighborhood outright. The same week the deal closed, I wired a significant portion into an investment account already overflowing. The rest I reinvested, compounding the growth. But the real power wasn't just the money. It was the connections. Over coffee in Manhattan, I met with an editor from a national business magazine. We talked shop, market trends, self-made entrepreneurs. Somewhere between cappuccinos, she floated the idea of a feature, people who'd been underestimated early on. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't commit then. I took her card and slipped it into my wallet. Not yet. Meanwhile, the reports from my financial contacts started coming in, and they were enlightening. My parents' retirement savings were thinner than they let on. Lila, despite her high-paying job, was drowning in debt. Luxury tastes, bad investments. That SUV down payment barely covered the initial fees, and she'd quietly taken out a second mortgage on her condo the year before. It wasn't just satisfying to know they were vulnerable. It was useful. And then there was my father. Buried in his records was an early investment in a small property development company, one that had been circling the drain for nearly a year. Worse, he'd personally guaranteed a loan for it. If the company collapsed, he'd be on the hook for 6 figures. And according to the projections, it was about 3 months away from imploding. That was the moment I knew how to set the stage. I didn't need to destroy them outright. That would look vindictive. No, I needed to let their arrogance do the work for me. Around the same time, the editor called again. The magazine was moving forward with the feature, and she wanted me as the centerpiece. A multi-page spread, professional photos, my full story. I agreed immediately, with one condition. The release date had to align with a specific month. The same month, my father's investment was due to collapse. As everything fell into place, rumors began reaching them. A friend of Lila's spotted me at a luxury hotel in Singapore, mid-meeting with sharply dressed executives. My mother's hairdresser overheard someone talking about a CEO named Carmela closing a massive overseas deal. They didn't contact me, but I could feel the curiosity growing, the unease. And I knew I was no longer just reacting. I was controlling the board they didn't even realize we were playing on. By the time the month arrived, everything was already in motion. All the pieces I'd spent half a year lining up were standing exactly where I needed them. Quiet, polished, inevitable. All that was left was timing. And timing, I'd learned, is what separates impulse from power. The business magazine hit newsstands on the first Monday of the month. My face stared back from the cover, calm and composed against a skyline backdrop, dressed in a tailored suit I'd chosen because it didn't scream success. It assumed it. From doubt to dominance. The self-made CEO who proved everyone wrong. The article didn't name my parents. It didn't mention Lila. It didn't need to. It talked about walking away from college, about being underestimated by the people closest to me, about building an empire quietly while others laughed. Within hours, it was everywhere. LinkedIn, business forums, group chats I wasn't even part of anymore. My phone buzzed nonstop. Congratulations from investors, messages from old acquaintances suddenly eager to reconnect, distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years, acting like they'd always believed in me. And right on schedule, my mother texted, "Carmela, we saw the magazine. We had no idea things had gotten this big. We're so proud of you." Proud. After everything. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, my father's property development company officially defaulted. The bank moved fast. The real estate investment firm I'd partnered with swept in and acquired the project at a steep discount. My capital secured controlling ownership without a single conversation, without my father's name ever crossing my lips. On paper, it was just another smart acquisition. In reality, I now owned the single biggest investment my parents had been clinging to. I waited 3 days. Then I had my assistant reach out with an invitation. Neutral, professional, impossible to ignore. A meeting at a high-end restaurant downtown. Business-related. Important. After the magazine feature, they didn't hesitate. When they arrived, they were smiling. My mother hugged me like we were close again. My father shook my hand with a firmness he'd never offered before, like we were equals. Lila complimented my suit, her voice dripping with a politeness I'd never heard from her. We ordered dinner, made small talk, pretended. Halfway through the main course, I slid a folder across the table. My father opened it first. I watched his smile falter as he read. This is our development, he said slowly. I tilted my head. Correction, it was your development. It's mine now. The table went silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I explained it cleanly, precisely. How the company defaulted, how the bank offloaded the asset, how I acquired it legally through an established firm. My mother's face flushed red. "Carmela, how could you?" I met her eyes. "The same way you walked into my bank account and took my money without permission. The same way you handed it to Lila. The same way you told people I was homeless." Lila didn't speak. Her jaw tightened. My father leaned back in his chair, suddenly smaller than I'd ever seen him. "The difference," I continued calmly, "is that I didn't lie or steal. I played the long game." I stood, placed my napkin on the table. "Oh, and don't worry," I added lightly. "The staff at the development site are keeping their jobs, just not you." I paid the bill and walked out. 3 days later, Matteo called. "Your parents are spiraling," he said. "Your dad hasn't left the house. Everyone knows you own the property." The story spread faster than I expected. Dinner parties turned into whispers, Pride turned into embarrassment. The narrative flipped, and I didn't have to say a word. Lila's SUV lease didn't get renewed. She downgraded quietly. A month later, she put her condo on the market. My parents reached out twice. First, a text from my mother. "We're still family." Ignored. Then a voicemail from my father, strained and desperate. "We need to find a way forward." Deleted. Months later, the development turned a profit. Families moved in. Kids played on freshly paved streets. Sometimes I drive past and watch them, thinking about how patience built that place more than money ever could. The last message I ever received from my mother was an email. "You've changed." She was wrong. I hadn't changed. I just stopped playing the role they wrote for me. And that, standing on my balcony, city lights glowing beneath me, was the real victory.